Hello and welcome again to our Revenue Radio podcast, powered by Kassouf Company, Kassouf Healthcare Solutions, where we enhance the business of medicine. I'm Jeff Dance. I'm the Executive Director at Kassouf Healthcare Solutions. Today, we welcome Phillip Langston. Phillip is the Director at Assured Partners, an insurance brokerage and advocate here in the healthcare space. It's good to have you, Phillip. And
Thanks,
you and I have known each other for quite a while.
Quite a while. Long journey.
Yeah. We've seen each other from the provider side all the way to the vendor side, and it's good to have you here. And you're going to bring great insight and perspective on what's going on.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and kind of share some things that I've seen firsthand and some of the opportunities that we get to partner with today.
Yeah.
And kind of building on our history as in the field, as they say.
Right.
So
right. Give
us a little bit different perspective on conquering the world that changes before us.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the space that you're in currently obviously is on the what I would call the vendor side. If you're
Sure.
on the practice manager side, tell us a little bit about how you approach that now. You've seen that. You've got 20 plus years of experience in healthcare. You approach a practice. You approach a potential client. What's the value that you can bring, again, seeing it from both sides now?
Yeah, absolutely. I joke all the time that, I'm a recovering practice manager, from that standpoint. So, but I think once you kind of are in that environment a little bit, you never really take your hat off, from that. You always sort of see the world through that lens. And again, that's the way I try to bring, just different viewpoints and different solutions that we have to offer to the medical industry in all kinds of different clients, physician practices, facilities, other ancillary providers, even into the skilled nursing side as well. So we're doing a lot of that work as well. But basically, so what I get to do now is help healthcare organizations maximize their investment in their insurance program.
Yeah, great.
And so insurance for a lot of folks is a burden, something you don't want to deal with. It's a commodity, and I try to preach the gospel that it's none of those things.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that you want to make sure that you have already charted a course before the shipwreck happens, and so you have an opportunity to kind of craft that solution ahead of time, and surround yourself with resources that are going to help you be able to sustain that business and whatever headwinds that you do face. And I know we'll get into several of those different areas that we're seeing today.
So Assured Partners, give us a little background on where you're located, I know you're here in Birmingham, but a little more about your company.
Sure. So Birmingham is just a small piece of the overall Assured Partners puzzle from a national perspective. We've grown very quickly. Our organization is about 10 or 11 years old, and in that time we've ascended to the 5th largest P&C brokerage firm in the country. We're about a $2 billion organization, top line revenue. So I get to run in a very deep channel, but at the same time I'm still kind of the guy down at the end of the block, and want to have that perspective. And so that's kind of the way our organization is constructed, is where we've aligned a lot of successful independent agencies all across the country in a lot of different areas, not just healthcare, but it's allowed us to specialize in a lot of those areas. And so, for me, that's the healthcare world is the world that I know and that I get to play in on a daily basis, and again bring a little bit of a different viewpoint and some anticipation of some of the issues that are happening and impacting folks on the front line there.
Right, good. In this day and age, we've got a lot of world events that are happening out there. Cyber threats are commonplace.
Right.
Healthcare, medical records.
Yeah, it's
it's one of the top priced black market assets and products out there, if you will. And I hate to say it that way. What is it that a physician owner, practice owner, practice manager really needs to know about their cyber coverage?
Sure.
How do you even go about getting that stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a proliferation in the market right now how you can get it. It just depends on what you're buying, right? So I mean, you can buy the the budget version, or you can go for the Cadillac, you know. And truth is, what you're really going to need lies somewhere in between those two extremes, right? So the cyber piece is something that there's not a week that goes by that I'm not having some kind of cyber conversation. And over the last year, I would tell you that there's a lot more discussion in terms of the claim activity that's there, and it hasn't been just we need to prepare for that day. That day's here.
Yeah.
And so from a cyber standpoint, like you mentioned, healthcare is a number one target. You've got everything contained in your medical records that can make a cyber hacker, a very wealthy person in a very short amount of time. And so there's a lot of things you can do to play on the defensive side. Obviously, your IT and your security plays a big part in that. So you've got to have your resources well positioned from that standpoint. But from a coverage standpoint, the other thing that we're seeing is this is something that's here to stay. When I remember, kind of when I was a purchaser of insurance coverages for medical practices. Hey, we've got this cyber offering too. Would you be interested in that? I was like, no, not really. I don't think. We're not really a target for anybody. And I think that mindset is still out there in the industry to a large part. And again, just thinking of, hey, I'm a small practice in Enterprise, Alabama. Nobody's going to be coming after my data. Well, just think about how many other parties you touch just running your business, vendors, other things like that. So any of those electronic footprints that you have can be compromised at any point in time, and that's going to impact you. So you really have to kind of have some defense up there from that standpoint. Actually, was mentioning this to Russ kind of coming in today. I heard some statistics yesterday from the FBI Internet Crime Report that cybercrime has ascended to a $6.9 billion industry in the United States alone. And that's up from about like 4.7, I think, billion, and that's billion with a B. So, the statement was made that every single day in the country, not just in healthcare, but in the country somewhere, $1 million cyber claim is originating. So think about that. Yeah. And think about all the businesses that are out there and how much we rely on the interconnectivity to perform our business. I mean, from a healthcare standpoint, you're uploading claims, you're transacting transactions at the front office there, you're buying supplies online, the providers' NPI numbers are out there and pretty easily accessible, for the right hackers. So, and then culturally, I think in the environment that we have, unfortunately, with the events that are going around with Russia and the Ukraine right now, it's only going to, I think, heighten what we're going to see in terms of the aggressiveness of these foreign hackers and stuff. And so cyber now has kind of morphed into a little bit of a two-headed monster. You always had nobody's going to hack in and get our information, or and back in the old days, like, well, all that's in paper records. They'd have to steal our medical records to do that. So you've kind of still got that animal out there, but the bigger animal that's out there that really is more prevalent in the market is really that ransomware standpoint, where your business can be shut down. And regardless of what you are, regardless of what size you are, if you have somebody else and an intrusion happens within your system somehow, most likely through somebody's clicking on a link thinking they want a free Starbucks gift card or something like that. I mean, it happens, and you've got to, your staff's got to be vigilant, from that standpoint. So there's education training that needs to go on there as well. But when you get when that happens and you're shut down and you can't transact business and you can't have the records at your disposal to make the clinical decisions that you need to make, there's some things that I've heard recently, and some very large cyber verdicts and penalties that have arisen around providers' inability to access current clinical data because their organization was under a cyber event at that time, and remediating that, and in the course of doing that was not able to render appropriate treatment, and ultimately a jury of their peers found them liable for that. So you're seeing it not just extend into cyber, I want to get my data back, to there's really physical harm,
Right.
That's been happening, as well as preventing business. So it's one of those things we talk about a lot in terms of evaluating what you need relative to the defenses that you already have in place.
So how does that figure into the Cadillac versus the
Sure.
whatever make and model that you're talking about? What, as a practice manager, as someone who's making that investment to get that ROI on that protection, what are some of those policy features that are just down and dirty I need to know about? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to get that big, thick
Policy
book.
Yeah, and it's going on the shelf.
Right, and I'm thinking about, okay, why do I have a drone policy in there, or drone coverage or something along those lines, or some seaboard type of coverage?
Yeah.
Give us some,
Sure.
Whittled down version of what we need to know.
Gotcha. So, and I think looking at that and kind of understanding how you are positioned, I think I would start really from what your defenses look like from your IT systems, because at the end of the day, that's really what you're after. I mean, what are you, how are you protecting your data? How are you keeping it under lock and key? So, are you working with a provider from an IT standpoint that's aggressively managing your backups? Are they working to test those backups? How quickly can they get them resurrected and back in process for you to transact daily information? So I think there's a big hand in glove piece with that, and there's not an opportunity that I look at from a cyber standpoint where I'm not including the IT vendor or partner or staff that are part of that organization. Because a lot of times they're doing the best they can or the best they have access to sometimes. And again, you're going to see all over the board there. So I can't minimize the investment that you're going to make in that standpoint. But to kind of highlight, well, okay, if I'm spending a lot of money on the IT side, well, what do I need to be spending money on cyber insurance?
Right.
You really do, because it's one of those things where together we're both chasing an animal that's changing all the time. The threats that we have seen and have remediation for in the past, that's a great place to start. Let's make sure the net's closed as tight as we can on those to prevent those from happening. But again, something else is going to happen, and we've got to have access to the right experts that are affiliated with your cyber coverage there. From a attorney standpoint, the forensic IT guys who are going to be different and charge a much heftier rate than your normal IT guys that are going to kind of go in and help you resurrect things, together from that. But then talking about things such as like dependent business income impact. If you're shut down and you kind of think back to some of these larger cyber events that we've had across the country where these large corporations were brought to their knees and not able to use their systems, you got to think about what's called dependent business income protection. And so if you're not able to transact business on a routine basis because somebody out there had another cyber event, while it may not really be impacting you, but it's impacting your ability to do business, you need to have an instrument that has coverage that will address that as well. And so you just sort of take an average of, what your monthly, cash flow and revenues look like from that standpoint, and it allows you to kind of weather that storm for whatever 2, 3, 6 months, whatever that looks like. So cyber coverage now, you're starting to see a lot of carriers that are kind of shirking back on trimming back some of the coverage because there's been so many claims. You've actually got carriers that are dropping it all together. You've got carriers that'll write everybody but healthcare. And again, you need kind of a trusted advocate there. It's kind of navigating the market to kind of steer you in the right direction, because just because you've had a policy in place the last few years, it doesn't necessarily mean they're even going to offer you a renewal. But because they may have things that are changing from the carrier side, and then you may also not have your systems in place to meet their underwriting criteria that keeps being ratcheted up as well.
That moral hazard type of thing where you have too much insurance, you're over covered, if you will. I don't think that a practice manager, someone that's a business leader, can ever not have the right coverage, but they need to understand what the correct limits are and the the parameters there. Let's change gears for a minute.
Sure.
More along the practical side. You're not an adjuster. You don't adjust. You don't go out and do the claims work.
No,
right?
we have internal folks within our agency that kind of spearhead those claims in partnership with the carrier reps that will do that actually adjustment process.
So I know the various agents and reps and brokers and people of that nature. You take the questions, but you really cannot start to give policy direction and how people should do things and such. Somebody falls in the clinic parking lot, for instance. Are
you leasing the space? Do you own the building? those are the questions.
Those are all the. Well, usually those are under separate LLC.
Right. Exactly.
All that
exactly.
kind of thing.
We may have no liability here whatsoever.
Yeah. We'll get to that on the real estate podcast. But along those lines, though, something does happen. You don't have an immediate lawsuit or action. When do I get my agent involved? When do I get my company involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, the as soon as those events happen, and that's really a protection for you as the client, as the ultimate insured, right? So something out of the ordinary like that happens, even in kind of the situation you just talked about. Somebody falls in the parking lot, and maybe it's somewhere you are renting, and so that liability is probably not yours because they haven't actually crossed the threshold into your facility to where your liability takes over. Getting your agent and your carrier involved in that, just in case something kind of happens. We actually had a very similar event to that where we got a client that they're in a POB and they had a little accident there of a patient that was coming to see them. So, their thought was, okay, the only reason they're on this property is to come to their doctor's appointment. So does that start when they get out of their car door? But go ahead and get your agent involved, because you never get dinged by any of your insurance companies in terms of how many claims or incidents or events you report. And it also is going to help from an overall risk management standpoint that if you see an issue start to evolve, hey, we've had a couple of these things that happened that, okay, really it wasn't our liability, but we need to kind of work together with our landlord or whatever in that case. So, and what I'll tell you too, that I've had enough conversations from a claim side to where you've got folks that have been a little bit more proactive in that nature of, hey, we've had an issue, don't know if it's going to be a claim, but we want to let y'all know about it. And then a claim actually happens. That you've established a pattern there that you're sensitive and that you're alert to what's going on, and you are aggressively aware of the risk that are going on, whatever that is. And then so when the claim happens, they're like, okay, this is legit, and we need to respond. And these guys have got a proven track record that they're going to be a good risk for us, to kind of continue to insure.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's that collaboration piece that continues to occur. As far as now you've got sort of exposure and such, you run into all kinds of situations, equipment that breaks or people tripping and all of that. I think people want to, or business owners many times want to find every reason for the insurance company to pay.
Sure.
That's
what you're paying for.
That's right. I paid them all these years. Now I got to.
Yeah.
Again, you want insurance there when you can't control things.
Right.
As far as the way I look at it, not everything needs to be filed as a claim because it's going to come back from an actuarial standpoint.
Sure.
Any guidance on those for those business owners, practice managers that are thinking, how do I set my policy of how I function when something like that does happen?
Right.
Are there certain limits or baselines, things of that nature that you want to help guide someone like that?
Really kind of two areas come to mind there, and really, I guess mentally making a shift in terms of how you are operating the business that you're running. there's inherent risk in everything we do, right?
Sure.
So, but how are you insulating yourself and protecting yourself from the risk of running a business? And for example, depending on how big your staff is, let's talk about workers' comp. You know, in the healthcare world, we run the gamut from your pediatrics primary care office with very low hazard liability, probably from a workers' comp standpoint, to surgery centers, skilled nursing folks, where you're lifting patients and you've got other avenues there. You're around sharps, those types of things. So education becomes primary. And so, again, it's not always about just, hey, give me the cheapest rate I possibly can get because it's all exactly the same. But it's not all exactly the same. And you've got carriers that are going to have programs that are customized and tailored to the medical environment. And you've got other carriers that may be a big nationally known powerhouse in insurance, but their medical channel runs very, very shallow.
Right.
But they're very well positioned in construction or whatever. So those are not the ones you want to deal with. A lot of these companies will tap into their risk management piece, and so you really kind of have a mindset of being an outsourced risk manager from that standpoint. What are some educational tools that we can provide to our staff that we don't have to go out and source, that company's pulling together for you? And I think that's kind of a sweet spot where our team has been able to do that, because we say it a lot that we want to earn our keep and our commission 365 days, and not just the day we show up with the renewal. Because if all I've done is come in and sell you a cheaper piece of paper, I've done you a tremendous disservice.
Right.
If I've not brought you tools to make you better on a month by month basis, from a safety, education, staff engagement, all those kind of things. So workers' comp is a big focus for us there. And also, when you kind of flip the coin and you talk about like employment practices liability,
that's the EPL.
EPLI,
yeah. Okay.
So this is insurance coverage and access to resources and legal experts that are specifically tailored to employment law and employment transaction. So, you look in the rearview mirror from all the COVID stuff. Some of us out in the healthcare world had to make some really, tough choices in terms of furloughing people or laying people off, or discontinuing jobs altogether. And maybe now we're coming out of that, and wow, we really do need a full-time patient transport person on this floor or whatever. So how you make those decisions about any kind of employment-related issue, terminations, discipline, those kind of things, subject you to some kind of risk that's there, EEOC or whatever.
Right.
So I've always told people that, if there's one piece of coverage that you can buy from me that's probably the most important, it's probably employment practices liability, because you're going to touch that all the time.
That's right.
And you're making those decisions, and to the best of your ability for vetting people, sometimes it just doesn't work out, or sometimes something happens, and you made a decision that you thought was in the best interest of everything, and okay, now this person is accusing you of something. So. And unfortunately, you get into those situations where you got to, prove your innocence, and defend yourself and defend, how you made decisions from that standpoint. And that can either come out of your checkbook, or that can come out of, your insurer's pocket pool of money that you place from a policy standpoint. So all those kind of policies around the protection of the business from an entity to transact and continue on and operate, I think are huge, and they don't get enough attention. And I think sometimes that, we want to focus in on the big ticket items. It's like, all right, I've got to have liability coverage, I've got to have property coverage, I've got to have malpractice, and some of these other coverages that can really jump up and hurt us as business owners and operators don't get the attention and the vetting that they need to.
Well, Phillip, it's been great having you with us today, and good seeing you again. And again, it's a topic that we need to hear. We don't always like to hear. Sometimes we feel a bit intimidated by, again, the book.
It is intimidating.
All that comes along with it. Thanks so much for enlightening us as we, again, just try to maximize and enhance everything that goes on in a practice. It's been great to have you here, and thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you again on another topic.
Absolutely, Jeff. I appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah, this has been great. Looking forward to coming back again.
Good. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us with our Revenue Radio, powered by Kassouf and Company, Kassouf Healthcare Solutions, where we enhance the business of medicine. This is Jeff Dance, and thank you again, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you for tuning in to the Kassouf Podcast Network. Resources for today's episode are linked in the episode notes. Thank you to our producer, Russ Dorsey, and for Kassouf for powering this podcast. Be sure to stay up to date on new episodes and more information about today's episode by following @KassoufCo. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.